Enhance Business Central using PowerApps. Now, why do we need PowerApps to enhance Business Central? While Business Central is a very powerful system that can do a lot of things, it has never really been that very user-friendly to the end user. It's been very good at making structured data and making it easy for bookkeepers and so on to use the system. But since Business Central has been created to be a one-size-fits-all, it cannot really be that identified into specific areas. And that's where we get PowerApps. What we can use PowerApps for is actually to create a user interface for a workflow that is specifically designed for that workflow. This means that the user will get the best experience possible using our system by still having the power of Business Central and the data model behind it. Now, when we're talking about PowerApps, there are three ways to extend Business Central using different kind of PowerApps. We got the model-driven apps, then we got the Canvas apps, and then we got Power Pages or Portal apps, which they used to be called. Now, if we start off looking at the Canvas app. The Canvas app is a very powerful way of designing your user interface for Power apps. You can customize it any way you want, and you can use multiple sources for this kind of app, which means that you can use web service or you can use Dataverse or any other kind of technology that you can connect to using connectors. This gives you the ability in Canvas apps to design using the UI and components, making it look like the brand that your customer needs or wants in the end. Now, the downside to Canvas apps is that since you have this flexibility to create the user interface in any way you want, that also leaves it open to having to have designers or any other kind of people who can take care of the user interface and use a lot of time on that part. Then we have the model-driven apps. The model-driven apps are not that free in how you can design the apps. However, it's easy because all the data is coming from one source, which is the Dataverse. Now, for data to come into Dataverse in Business Central, we're going to have to use virtual tables. And we'll get back to how we can connect Business Central using virtual tables to the Power Platform. But just keep in mind that the model-driven apps is only based on Dataverse. The upside to model-driven apps is like in Business Central, the user interface is kind of static, which means that you don't have to use a lot of time on designing something because you don't have that much flexibility. However, that also means that your apps across your whole company will look and feel the same. So you don't really have to use that much time on trying to brand everything separately because you're using the same framework to design everything. The last thing we have is Power Pages. I'm not going to cover Power Pages that much because Power Pages is something that we don't see used that often. It's a way to make a regular portal or a website based on data from Dataverse using PowerApps or data from other sources. So it's a secure way to actually take data from your Business Central and make it available to your end customers, B2B customers, or whatever kind of customers you have. So the idea is that instead of having to create like a web shop for your end users, you could actually use Power Pages to do this for you, giving the tools and everything available in the Power Platform and letting that actually control everything synchronizing with Business Central. Okay, now we have to look at, we have the Canvas app and we have the model-driven app. So which one should we choose? Well, it actually depends on what we want, of course. A good rule of thumb is to always try to start off with the model-driven app. The reason for that is, like I stated earlier, it's easier to get started with, and therefore it's easier to start getting something out to the customer very fast, thereby making it cheaper for the customer in the long run. However, of course, there are the limitations that you cannot design your model-driven app to look like a normal app on a phone, which means you come with this framework on how things can be created. Now, there is a way to actually embed a Canvas app into a model-driven app, which means you can actually get the best of both worlds. But again, that means you're going to have to create a Canvas app. And if you anyway are going to create a Canvas app, maybe you should just make everything in the Canvas app. It's just to keep in mind that you have the possibility to create a Canvas app and embed it if there are some very specific things that you need to design. Otherwise, try so much as possible to stick to the model-driven app. The power behind the model-driven app is, of course, that it's using Dataverse as our database, which means that everything goes through the same kind of connector. Now, for this to work in Business Central, like I said earlier, we're going to need virtual tables. Now, virtual tables are a way for Business Central to virtualize their data and send it into Dataverse, which can then be accessed to whatever Power Platform you need. It's important to note here that data is not replicated to Dataverse. Dataverse is only making like an interface that will look directly into Business Central. So the data is still living in Business Central, and any data that you're modifying is also modified directly in Business Central in real time. So there's nothing about trying to keep data in sync. Business Central to actually send things into Dataverse, we're using API pages. So you might think that virtual tables are actually just all the tables in Business Central that has been virtualized, and then you can see them, but that's not how it is. You still have to create API pages, and these API pages can then be consumed by the Dataverse and then be part of the Dataverse platform. So for a developer, a Business Central developer, if you're talking about making your system Business Central connectable, it doesn't really make that much of a difference if you're going to use a model-driven or you're going to use a Canvas app, because you still have to create the same API pages as you would if you same kind of API pages, no matter which platform you're targeting. Now, of course, the downside to this approach is that, like anything else, when you have something in between, when you are having an abstraction layer, of course, things are going to run a little bit slower than if you access the data directly. So, like everything else, the usability comes at a cost of performance. So that's something you have to keep in mind if you want to use a model-driven app for your Business Central. Is the performance very important? If so, maybe the model-driven app is not for you. However, the great thing about using a model-driven app and using the Dataverse as your connector, which you can actually also use the Dataverse in the Canvas app if you wanted to, but now let's just say that you are using it as a model-driven app. The whole idea about getting your data into the Dataverse means that Microsoft is actually handling all of the security and all of the authentication between Business Central and Dataverse. So you don't have to make all these app registration and overflow and everything else that can be kind of complicated. You don't need an Azure Key Vault to store your client secret and have to renew it and stuff like that, because everything is handled by Microsoft. Now, okay, let's look at the Canvas app. The Canvas app can also connect to Dataverse, so you're not saying just because we want to use Dataverse, you cannot use a Canvas app. You can do that. The power behind the Canvas app is, however, that you can also access the APIs directly, meaning you can cut off the interface between the Dataverse and Business Central. You can directly connect. Of course, there's something about having to decouple systems and design patterns and stuff you might have to keep in mind here, because having a tight coupling to our system can, of course, not be a good idea. And you should always consider if you need the performance boost or if the abstraction actually is a great thing. Because remember, if you put something in Dataverse, it's not only your Power Apps that can access it, it's pretty much anything inside of the Power Platform or even inside Azure that can access your data through Dataverse, meaning that Dataverse will become a connection point for everything going in and out of your systems. Now, the other great thing about Canvas apps, besides, of course, having the direct connection to Business Central, is that it can connect to multiple data sources at the same time in the same screens. So you're not limited to having everything in Dataverse. So you can have a lot of systems integrating in different ways onto the same app. Now, of course, this can also be kind of challenging, because it means you have to keep a lot of security things in mind, and you have to keep track of how everything is connected. Now, this cannot be solved by using something like a custom connector. We're not going to talk about a custom connector in this video. We will look at it in a different video. But just keep in mind that a custom connector might be the way to go if you're working on the Canvas app, even though it of course again gives you abstraction layer, but sometimes abstraction layer is the best way to decouple your systems. The powerful thing about Canvas app, besides having the multiple way of connecting to different data sources, is of course that you can design it in any way you want. This, however, also comes with a downside, because when you design something, you might design it for either a phone or a tablet or the web or whatever you want, but it has to be able to scale to different platforms, and that you have to handle yourself. There's nothing given to you when you're working on a Canvas app, because a Canvas app is just like a blank canvas. You start, and then you start putting in your elements. So you have to make it able to change if you are working on a different kind of screen size. Or in the model app, this of course is handled by the framework itself. Now this might not be a problem for you, because you might say, my app is only for phones or it's only for tablets. And then you say, okay, so I'm only going to scale it. And if you're going to run it on a phone, it's your own problem if it doesn't look correctly, or the other way around. Okay, so let's see how we can actually connect our Business Central to the Dataverse, so we can get things ready for our next videos, where we're going to look at how to create a Canvas app and a model-driven app from scratch, using both the Dataverse and using the regular connection directly from Business Central. So let's get to it.
Okay, so to connect our Business Central to the Dataverse, we have to go up here, and then we will search for Dataverse, and let's say show on, and then you have the connection set up here. Let's run through the guide, say always allow, and then the assistant setup. Here we have the ability to choose if you want to use virtual tables and events, and we also want to synchronize data. It's up to you if you want to also put data directly into some of the tables in Dataverse, where you're actually replicating the data. This of course could be a good idea if you are working with something like a CRM system or something else that uses these tables already, and you need to keep the data in sync. I'll just leave it default. Then of course we have to accept the terms. And here it will ask us to set up connection. It will already know which kind of tenant you're running on, and on that tenant, if there is something that you can connect to. Then we need to sign in with an administrator account. And here I will be using my administrator account here. And now it says the administrator is signed in, so we can go to next. We have the ability to use either a person or a team model. I will use the team model. And then you can complete setup without synchronization. Again, this depends on if you want to synchronize your data directly or if you want to use the virtual tables. I'll just leave it like that. And we'll press next. And here it will tell you, if you don't have, I've already installed it, the Business Central virtual app is installed. If not, you can press this. There will be a link here. Sorry, you can press here. And it will tell you how to install the virtual app inside your Power platform, which is what you need to connect. And then you press finish and you're done. So now if I go over to my Power platform over here, to access my Dataverse, I will go to tables. And as you can see, we already have a lot of tables. We have the recommended and the custom, then we have all. What we have to find over here to actually get our virtual tables to work, we'll search for Business Central, and then we have the available. Now there's the deprecated, and then there is the one that we actually want to use. And you can see it's a virtual type. If you press here, you will see all of our different APIs and also the API here, and you have the ability to see different kind of fields if you want something else, where you can see the logic names and stuff like that. If we press here, we will be able to see the complete list. And you can see all the standard. And if I try to go down here, you can see I have some which I will be using later on in my next videos, but these are custom. As you can see, these are custom. So you also have the ability to get your custom APIs as part of the Dataverse. Now let's try to turn one of the other ones on. To do that, let's find item and make it visible. So it's saving. And now it's done. So let's go back to our tables here. We go to all and let's search for item. And now we have our new item table here. You can see it's virtual. If we try to press it, you can see we have all our items from Business Central inside Dataverse. And again, of course, we have the ability to see what fields are available. As you might notice, these are not all fields, and that's of course because we are using the item API, and the item API does not have everything available. Now, another thing we can do is if we go back to Business Central and we go back to the Dataverse connection setup, here we can see available virtual tables. And here we can see, for example, this one is visible. Also, if we go into item, we can also see visible, which means you can also from Business Central actually see which tables are available inside the Dataverse. And that's pretty much all there is to connecting our Business Central to Dataverse. So the only thing we need to do is of course run through the wizard, and then besides that is like connecting anything else, we need to create some API pages that we will then decide to connect to the Dataverse. The only thing, of course, you have to keep in mind is now it's getting important that when you create a new version, that you actually create another one, because if people start mapping to your Dataverse table and you then start making changes to your item, for example, now of course you can do that. We couldn't do it on item, but let's say one of my custom ones, if I wanted to start making changes to one of those, then you will be breaking schema changes for anything that is already working on that API in Dataverse. Now, this is of course not different than working on APIs in general, but just keep that in mind. So it's remember to create a version 2 if you're making something breaking changes while you're not still in development. Now, as you might have noticed, over in Dataverse things doesn't run that fast, so that's something you have to keep in mind. But besides that, it's actually that simple to connect your Business Central to Dataverse. So let's get back to the conclusion.
So to conclude this video, keep in mind we have a Canvas app and we have the model-driven app. And you have to choose the one that fits for your needs. And to make a more informed decision, it's important to know the limitations and advantages of both. And that is something that we're going to cover in the next couple of videos, so you can actually see how it is to work with these different kind of platforms. Well, thanks for watching, stay safe, and goodbye.